This is a special election eve edition of Outsiders.
Good evening and welcome to Outsiders. And tonight, as a special treat, we're going to invite you, the audience, to join us as we play the most exciting new game on Australian television.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for Change Your Nation!
And joining me on the judging panel are Rita Panahi and James Morrow. What a great show we've got lined up tonight. Guys, how are you both?
Oh, we are excited to play Change Your Nation.
Rita, are you ready to play Change Your Nation?
I am so excited, I can't wait!
James, it's a big ask. Tell us the rules.
Well, the rules are pretty simple here, Rowan. Our audience has just 24 hours to decide whether or not to change the nation.
Okay, let's get straight into the main game. And James, tonight's lucky contestant is...
Well, let's have a look. Here we've got the envelope. Let's find out who it's going to be. It is... Australia!
Wow, who'd have guessed such a wonderful, prosperous, free and beautiful nation? I wonder why on earth Australians would ever want to...
Change Your Nation!
So, Rita, here's the big question. What place could ever be better than Australia? If Australians do decide to change their nation, what nation are they going to change it into?
Well, let's see what we've got in the envelope. It's Venezuela!
Here's the challenge, folks. Can you, the audience, change Australia into Venezuela in just 24 hours? Can it be done? Well, before we turn Australia into Venezuela, let's just take a quick look at how Venezuelans see Venezuela. Oh, okay, maybe not that bit. A little bit embarrassing. Let's ask an academic about the key to understanding what makes Venezuela Venezuela, so we can learn how to imitate it.
Once there was a South American country with a promising future. It had a functioning democracy, a rapidly developing economy, and a growing middle class. All the important indicators, including education, healthcare, and foreign investment, were pointed in the right direction. It was far from perfect, but the mood was hopeful, and with good reason. But now all that promise is gone. The country is a failed state, a hollowed-out shell of its former self. Services like power and water are sporadic. The most basic consumer goods, from bread to toilet paper, are in chronically short supply. Crime has skyrocketed. Freedom of the press is almost non-existent. Democracy has been replaced by a virtual dictatorship. The country is, I'm sorry to say, my beloved Venezuela, a place in which my family has deep roots. I can tell you what happened to it in one word: socialism.
Ah, socialism. Oh. Yes, I've heard of that before. So if we are going to successfully change Australia into Venezuela, we are first going to have to change our government into a socialist one. How on earth could we do that in just 24 hours?
How?
Let's ask Margaret Thatcher.
Two ways in which any government can proceed. One is a way based on what you and I would call a free society, which is enshrined right at the heart of the American Constitution. The other one is a way which allows only one view, both of economics and politics, in which almost everything is either owned or controlled by the state, including the media, including the ideas, including freedom of discussion.
No freedom of discussion. Rita, James, help me out here. No,
Hang on, how does that work? Are we all going to be rugby players? What?
No idea.
Australia!
What's going on? I don't get it.
If we are going to succeed in our quest to change Australia into Venezuela, we have to make sure there is only one opinion allowed on complex issues like, say, climate change or gays going to hell. And at the same time, we must make sure, as Maggie suggests, that there is no freedom of discussion. I don't think that will be too hard. In fact, it's already happening.
We're going to make sure that we've got laws that regulate our media so that if people like Andrew Bolt and Alan Jones and Chris Kenny, and I could go on and on and on, if they want to use hate speech to divide the community, then they're going to be held to account for that hate speech.
Or even better, why not just ban asking questions altogether, like this bloke does?
Oh, OK. I'm going to give someone else a go.
Answer the question. When can people know?
Dan.
When can people know, Mr Shorten, the cost of the economy? You didn't answer the question.
Do you know what, John? I'm going to go to the next person.
No, you should answer the question. That's why we're here to ask questions, and you're not answering the questions.
All the government ever does is say, oh, the cost of taking action on climate change is too much. Whereas Athena...
In fact, they ask you what your policies are going to cost, and until now we don't have an answer. Do you have an answer?
Because it's one of... OK, I know people want just to not be controversial, but I want to give you a controversial answer back to that, Tony. That is such a dumb question to say, what does it cost without looking at the cost of inaction?
Dumb question. Don't know why we bothered asking. So, Rita and James, I think when it comes to getting rid of free speech and freedom of expression, the good news is we're already well on the way.
Yay!
Halfway there, at least.
We're doing well, Australia. But the biggest change we will have to make in order to turn Australia into Venezuela, and remember, we've only got 24 hours for you to do it, is to change our economy.
Gradually, over the last certainly 12 or 13 years, with perhaps a little interruption, gone slowly further and further away from the free society towards something else. At the same time, we've found, I don't find it strange, but some other people do, that we have stopped creating wealth. We've had a large number of increasing restrictions, and you've been finding two things. First, that we are more and more concentrating on redistributing the wealth we've got rather than creating any more. To create more, you need a slightly freer society and you need an incentive society. Naturally, when I see that happening, I look with very great alarm to societies which have gone even further left.
Ah, so that's easy, James and Rita. All we need to do is go further left to stop creating wealth. I mean, how hard can that be? Just shut down a few coal mines, jack up the cost of electricity, and hey presto, the economy will be on its knees before you can say inheritance tax. And then let's get cracking on redistributing whatever wealth we still have left over as fast as we possibly can.
The very first item of business at our very first Cabinet meeting will be a new Commonwealth submission to the Fair Work Commission for a real wage increase for the working people of this country. The first laws that we will seek to pass will be the restoration of Sunday penalty rates for working people.
Fantastic. Give it all away. And of course, Chris Bowen is planning to rip $367 billion out of the economy if he becomes Treasurer. Now, that should help, I think. I think we agree that would help.
Idea.
Finally, here's a description from the Conservative woman, no, not Maggie, the English magazine of that name, about Venezuela, which they describe as a socialist horror show. Bit harsh, I would have thought, but anyway, let's see if any of this strikes a chord. Rita.
Well, if you want a demonstration of the power of socialism, look at Venezuela, a once thriving country with the biggest proven oil reserves in the world, now in a pitiful state of collapse. In 1970, Venezuela had a per capita GDP greater than Spain's. Now it is a country of starvation where desperate people pick through rubbish for food.
Well, the popularity of the government stemmed from throwing vast amounts of money into welfare programs and public services. Whatever public money wanted, the public could be afforded. The government had found the mythical money tree.
Well, they certainly did. They found that the more the government interfered, James, I'd grab a glass of water.
I think my voice has gone socialist here.
The excitement of turning Australia into Venezuela is getting to you, James. Have a sip of water while we can still afford it. The workings of the free economy, and the more the media lost its power to challenge government excess, the worse the economic situation became. But the president of Venezuela didn't just satisfy the nation's material needs, he was also entertainer-in-chief. A clown, prancing for the cameras.
When you met a worker in Gladstone,
where are you going?
And they were earning $250,000, and you sidled up to him, you're having a bit of a chat to him, and he complained about this, and what did you say to him? He said, oh, we'll have a look at that. You couldn't look him in the eye and tell him that you were going to increase his taxes by 2% on the 1st of July of this year.
Good there? Yeah.
I'm just wondering, can you look me in the eye and tell you're going to increase the taxes?
You're a classic space invader.
There we go. Entertainer-in-chief. So now, judges, do you think in the 23 hours and 50 minutes that remain, can Australians successfully
change your nation?
James, I think all that talk of socialism is getting
It's got me so excited. You know, I think what it might be is I was almost thinking, like, if it's Venezuela, it might be like Cuba. We'd have Cuban cigars, and that might be making me cough. So who knows? But look, this is actually really serious stuff here. We have seen so much talk that is essentially socialist. I know it's the S word. We're not supposed to say it because it's alarmist. But we have had, in the last couple of weeks, we have had Bill Shorten saying, I'm going to intervene in the economy and I'm going to top up wages for one sector, not this one. We've had Chris Bowen saying, hey, who cares if your house goes into negative equity? I thought that that was just the biggest attack on middle-class, wealth-creating people I've heard out of any responsible politician in years.
Well, if you're a property owner, you're now an enemy of the little people. I mean, 70% of Australians either own their own home or paying it off. And here we've got the future Treasurer saying, well, so what if your biggest asset goes backwards in value? We've already got 1 in 25 loans that are negative, where the equity is, where the loan is greater than the value of the property. It's negative equity.
And this is someone please send a copy of The Big Short to Chris Bowen, the film about the subprime crisis in America, where and there was the poor people who were hit the hardest, the equity in their home went down, they owed more than the home was worth, and the entire world economy, Chris Bowen, nearly came to a halt. Great idea to have negative equity in your home, Chris Bowen. That's what Labor are offering, James.
And that is exactly the point you make so clearly. This will hit the Labor heartland seats, Western Sydney, Western Melbourne, all of the working class battler seats that Labor says, oh, we're for the working person, but now they're treating them like Soviet kulaks, you know, that, oh, you're just wealth hoarding, wealth creating, middle class people. We need to take wealth out of you that you have worked hard for and earned and give it to this group over here and this group over here that we think are more deserving, and I think it stinks.
Well, and if you complain, of course, Rita, if you complain, as one poor guy actually didn't even complain, he just asked a question about whether he would be in for a tax cut. He got punted from his company by a Labor socialist government. They went, OK, get this guy off, get him out of here. This is what happens, the power of the unions, the nexus between unions and Labor power, the damage they can do and the power they wield so mercilessly against any worker who dares stand up and speak, Rita.
That poor guy wasn't rude. He wasn't trying to do a gotcha question. He just said,
ask.
It'd be nice to have tax cuts for some high-income earners. It wasn't his fault Bill Shorten lied to him to his face and then got embarrassed because of it. And then the cover-up, after the Courier Mail had the exclusive, this guy was, you know, not allowed in the next day, they tried to cover it up. In the end, it all came out. But the nerve of these people and the sense of entitlement they have to rule.
You see, I think this election campaign has actually revealed far more than we think. I actually think it's been a really interesting campaign. It's gone to the character, not only of the two individuals, but the character of the two political movements. And the character of Labor is to suppress any discussion, any questions. They even boast about not answering questions, and then they threaten to shut down the media like this show and other shows on this network and other newspapers who dare to ask a question. What power will the average human in Australia, will the average person, the average voter have if Labor get in, if this is how they behave before they're in power?
And Rowan, think about it. Today we had the news that Israel Folau was finally being punted from rugby. So we've had rugby, we've had this fellow. This is the state of speech in this country.
Oh, it is deplorable. And they are willing to win dirty. They're well in front. You look at the bookmakers' odds, and yet, what did they spend the week doing? Asking Scott Morrison about his attitude to whether homosexuals are going to hell. What question is that to be asking in the final days of the campaign?
And again, there's only one answer you're allowed to give. In Labor's world, there's only one answer you're allowed to give. I just want to show you quickly.
Dirty and low.
What amuses me all the time is I had a chat with some members of the family who were saying, oh no, but socialism it hasn't worked in the past, you know, but it's going to work now because, you know, socialism works if you've got compassionate, caring mob like Bill Shorten. Here's a great cartoon I just wanted to show you to answer that question. Let's have a look. So there you have, everyone else who tried this has gotten hurt. The guy's trying to plug a fork into the socket and it's got socialism written on it. Everyone else did it the wrong way. So that's what we're in store for, a repeat of socialism if people are insane enough to vote for the socialist option that is now their Labor and their friends, the Greens. Let's have a little bit of Outsiders News. I was pretty interested in this story that, we've talked a lot before about the anti-Semitism in Labor in the UK and amongst the Democrats in America, and it's a left-wing thing. Bill Shorten has actually been a great friend to the Jewish community, but he is surrounded by a lot of people who are not friends to the Jewish community. We now learn that if they get into power, that Labor will reverse the decision to move the embassy to Jerusalem. An outright play to curry favour with the Palestinians.
Well, we've seen when the US did it, when Donald Trump followed through with the pledge that he would do it, same pledge that George W. Bush, or Obama, Clinton, they all made it in the election campaign. None of them had the guts to do it. He did it, and they were warned it was going to be World War III, it was going to be disaster. What happened? Nothing. We've just had the one-year anniversary.
And how is it that you look around the world stage, how is it that all the supposedly alt-right people who cozy up to neo-Nazis, they're all the ones who want to move their embassies to Jerusalem? I mean, Donald Trump, I'm sorry, you know, the worst neo-Nazi ever. But seriously, this also leads into, I think, this other question of broader anti-Semitism on the left, on the Greens. We had this other story today with the Greens, with their other candidate, with Connor Paresis, who was the candidate for Barton in southern Sydney.
He was the one we saw screaming the other day, we saw it on telly the other night, screaming at a a Christian person about how dreadful their ideas were, and he told them to go wank themselves or something or other. He turns out to be a BDS supporter. What a surprise.
Of course.
There you go, on his Facebook page. BDS, of course, boycott, divest, sanctions, which is this idea of depriving any businesses that happen to be Israeli. It's the most anti-Semitic movement in the world today, supported by the likes of Roger Waters and other well-known anti-Semites. Labor should be very careful. I think the fact that they're prepared to go back on the move of the embassy says an awful lot about the Labor Party and their values.
And I also want to talk about some of the really ugly antics we've seen from activists in this campaign. We've had the egging, we've had the feces sent to Tony Abbott's office, we've had all the Nazi graffiti on,
Josh Frydenberg,
a number of Now we've got Dave Sharma, who has been the target of several ugly tactics, but today he tweeted out that his car has been vandalised. He said, police are appealing for information after our campaign vehicle was broken into this morning at Edgecliff Station. If you know this woman or if you have any information, please call Crime Stoppers. And he posted up 3 pictures. this is just ridiculous. Earlier in the week, you had to have cybersecurity experts in to see who's behind another ugly campaign to spread misinformation.
You know, Wentworth is, you know, ground zero for a lot of this. I've been talking to people who are working on the campaign in Wentworth. They say they have had to pay security guards to watch overnight the polling stations and all the places where they've set up their signage for tomorrow because they're under such a threat of vandalism. We've now seen up in Warringah, where Tony Abbott is running against Sally Stengel, there's been news this week that seems to link possibly the people who are involved in the putting up of those very vile and disgusting signs about Tony Abbott to people from Get Up. So we're looking into that. It is this feral hard left, and I just don't know how that isn't just chasing off mainstream voters who say we should want nothing to do with anybody who's pushing that sort of division.
Well, I just think join the dots. You've got coming from the top of the Labor Party and the Greens Party that they want to suppress the media, they want to suppress dissent. Then you have this thuggery and intimidation of people just going about doing their normal democratic jobs.
And that is evident at pre-polling booths. We've had calls on the radio all week saying that
Price has been intimidated up there in the Northern Territory.
And she can stick up for herself. That is one tough woman. She has faced so much crap. But some of these little old ladies going off to vote early, and they're being bullied when they. I mean, this is Australia.
This is the thing.
How could this be happening?
They are turning Australia into like the worst sort of American university campus, where they are trying to raise the price of entry for being a conservative or supporting a conservative so high that people won't even bother, because even if they know that they're right, they don't want to have to deal with all of the nonsense that they're going to get.
That's how you get Trump.
Correct.
Now, later in the show, we're going to give you some of our outsiders' tips on who we think you should be voting for, or to put it another way, who we voted for, or will vote for. Because lots of people come up and ask us, you know, how would you vote? It's not as easy as it looks. It's not straightforward. But we're going to talk about that later on in the show. One thing that I saw a terrific article by Ron Boswell, the former National Senator in The Australian the other day, and he discussed something which has kind of been avoided in this entire election campaign, which is Labor have a hit list of 250 businesses that they call big polluters. And they are going to attack these businesses, force them to meet certain reductions, meet their insane targets that they've got. And, of course, this can only be done, ultimately, by firing people or making your business smaller. You know, there are many ways you can do it, but all of them come at a cost to workers and profits. But the interesting thing that Ron points out is of these 250 businesses that are on Labor's hit list of the big polluters, none are in the electorate of Bill Shorten. None are in the electorate of Tanya Plibersek. None are in the electorate of any of the Greens. Where are all these big businesses located? Out in the bush, where the Nationals are, where hard-working Australians struggle to actually hold on to jobs out in rural Australia. Places like companies like Bega Cheese is supposedly a big polluter. Queensland firm Mackay Sugar. You've got alumina refiners. You've got Wagga City Council is supposedly a big polluter. You've got Maribyrnong. You've got sorry, that's Bill Shorten's thing. That's where there aren't any. You won't find any big polluters in those sort of inner places. And he goes through the whole list. Dairy places in Wynyard, Braddon in northwest Tasmania, 9 firms employing more than 2,500 Tasmanians. The list goes on and on, 14,000 Queenslanders. So all these people out in rural Australia, Labor and the Greens, don't give a rat's about you. Just remember that.
But to be fair, it's not like these Greens electorates are really full of wealth-creating businesses. I mean, how many vegan cafes can you tax out of existence, you know?
Avocado.
Yeah, come on.
You're being a bit harsh there, mate.
Wow. There's a lot of public service jobs in those seats, so the income's coming in and we're paying for it.
Now, there's also been a lot of talk about inheritance tax. Now, for people who don't know. So, Labor have gone and hit, you know, with this whole franking credits thing, they've attacked the poorest, the retirees, people who can no longer generate any wealth, who did all the right things throughout their lives. They planned their lives. They chose the correct investments, knowing that those investments would return money to them.
They kept them in union funds, they'd be keeping their investments.
Yeah, of course.
So maybe they didn't pick the right investment.
Absolute rort by Labor to attack the most vulnerable people, retirees and so on, by taking away their super, which is money they are owed by a return of tax, and Bill Shorten regards it as a gift. Shorten and Tanya Plibersek and others that have denied any plans. Oh, there's no inheritance tax. An inheritance tax is common amongst socialist and left-wing movements and political parties. Basically, if you die, they'll take your money and they'll give it to the state instead of you being able to pass it on to whoever you wanted to, your kids or the cat home or whoever else. What fascinates me is Labor keep denying, oh no, we've got no plans for anything like that, even though they're quite happy to steal the savings of retirees and pensioners and so on, and negative gearing changes, the capital gains taxes, all of which hurt retirees. Well, guess what? One of the Senate candidates, Tim Ayres, who's a Labor Senate candidate in New South Wales 2 years ago, there he was out pumping for an inheritance tax, where he was saying, now he may well have changed his mind about it because, but only 2 years ago he was quite happy to be supporting the French economist Thomas Piketty's proposal for an inheritance tax, which would basically take the money when you die and give a one-off capital grant to every citizen who's 25. So all the millennials, here you go, have the lot of it, have the money, we'll take it off the old people when they die. That's a Labor Senate candidate. As I say, he may have changed his mind in the last 2 years, or he may not have. But that's what you could easily be voting for. And the Greens, of course, definitely want inheritance taxes.
Well, you've got to love the chutzpah of Labor, because we all know their tendencies in this area, but they actually created an attack ad last month saying that Scott Morrison wants to have death taxes. So this is some 1984 Orwellian.
Well, it's all of that. I mean, we've seen not just the fellow you quoted, I think Andrew Lee, another senior economics person.
Oh, he's changed his mind.
But he's changed his mind. We've seen union economists. The funny thing is, though, in Scandinavia, in one of the Scandinavian nations, I think it was Denmark, they actually brought in a death tax some years ago, and they found it was so inefficient, so easily awarded, so easily avoided, and caused so many problems in the economy and raised so little money that they just scrapped it. So, like, we are going to try, it's a fork in the outlet. We are just going to try, let's try every dumb idea that's ever come down the pike, stick a fork in it, we're done.
Now, the reality is that the election we're facing tomorrow is one of those momentous elections where you can change the nation. For better or for worse. And it's pretty clear that we are seeing a similar situation to 1992 in Britain, where a hard left Labor government under Neil Kinnock was riding high in the polls. And there was a brilliant newspaper headline which summed up the mood in Britain the night before the election. There we go. If Kinnock wins today, will the last person to leave Britain please turn out the lights? Well, the good news is in Australia, James and Rita, we won't have to turn out the lights if Labor get in, because the lights will turn themselves out, because we'll have one blackout after another. And now, we're going to take a short break. When we're coming back, we've got some Ronnie Reagan, we've got lots more, we've got Rita and James, we've got lots to talk about, and we will tell you how we're going to vote. Back in a tick.
Thanks for watching this special Election Eve edition of Outsiders with me, Rita Panahi, Rowan Dean and James Morrow. Now, if you think a government can't do much damage in a single term, then you're in for a surprise. If Labor win tomorrow, then Bill Shorten will lead the most radical left-wing government in modern Australian politics. A stark departure from the Labor Party of Bob Hawke and Paul Keating, which unashamedly promoted economic reform, deregulation and appeal to aspirational voters. Old Labor's raft of economically liberal policies lay the foundation for 28 years of economic growth. But Shorten's Labor has abandoned those principles for cheap populism. Labor has used class warfare to appeal to voters' worst instincts. It's all ask not what you can do for your country, ask what your country and its long-suffering taxpayers can do for you. If you were to believe Labor and the Greens, the working poor are carrying the tax burden in this country, while the rich dodge their responsibilities. But the reality is that the top 10% of income earners pay about 50% of all personal income tax collected in this country, even after generous tax concessions or handouts, as Labor calls them. The bottom 30% of earners pay only about 5%, and that's before you factor in government benefits. The problem we have in this country isn't the rich not paying their fair share, but close to half the country's income units paying no net tax. Shorten waging a war on the most productive members of society, the ones doing the heaviest lifting in working hard, paying taxes, saving, investing their hard-earned, generating wealth and employing people, is not going to end well for Australia. It's a strategy that has been employed elsewhere in the world, and it always is guaranteed to leave the country poorer and more divided. The politics of MB may be a reliable vote winner, but it's also destructive. On the positive side, it would be good times for those of us in the media. Chaos equals compelling content, and I expect to be very busy over the next 3 years. But if you are a self-funded retiree, investor, small business operator or a homeowner, then expect to endure some economic pain along with ever greater intrusions on your personal freedoms. Unless Scott Morrison can pull off the most famous victory in modern Australian politics and do what no one other than Rowan Dean thought possible, and that is to repair the damage of the great imposter Malcolm Turnbull, unite a fractured team and return them to government against all odds. Rowan, you were all by yourself.
No, I'm still sticking to it. Scott Morrison is going to win this election, and he's going to win it tomorrow. And the reason he's going to win it is because of character, as I said, and because ultimately Australians recognise exactly what you were talking about, Rita. They know it. They know in their gut that Labor equals economic pain and hardship. So they get some trendy little pollster saying, oh, how are you going to vote? Oh, yeah, Labor. And they get into that booth, they see the choice, they have it there in front of them, economic pain versus no economic pain. They're going to go for Liberals. Scott Morrison is going to be Prime Minister on Sunday morning.
You've got a lot of faith in the economic knowledge of the average voter. I just think we go through this cycle constantly for decades where we have Labor coming in, being reckless, the coalition come in, fix the damage, everyone forgets how bad it was, put Labor back in again and repeat.
We're like repeat, what do we call sort of dependency or something?
Well, I mean, I think it is a case. I think Rowan here has probably as much faith as Israel Folau does on this matter. But
well, let's talk about that.
Yeah, well, we should talk because today we did have Raylene Castle come out. She gave that depressing press conference today where she said, nope, he's out for his sins against rugby and wokeness. Never mind what other rugby players have done in the past.
We're all for inclusivity and diversity.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
yes.
So long as you think the same way.
You're a Pacific Islander who's a devout Christian,
yeah.
Which about, what, a third or to a half of the Wallabies are. This is just absolutely awful. And Folau put out a statement. I'll just read you a section of it. He said, as Australians, we are born with certain rights, including the right to freedom of religion and the right to freedom of expression. The Christian faith has always been a part of my life, and I believe it is my duty as a Christian to share God's word. Upholding my religious beliefs should not prevent my ability to work or play for my club and country. Now, as an atheist who he thinks is hellbound, I've got to say I agree with him 100%. I may not agree with what he posted, but I will defend his right to say it, and to sack him over it is so illiberal. It is so...
Absolutely.
Well, but that's funny you use the word illiberal, because actually that's the weird thing we're going into now, this sort of weird totalitarian liberalism where everybody has to think the same things. All of the old traditions are destroyed, and we all have to just go along with this. And the funny thing is now we've got this situation here with Folau, with the Queensland miner, with all of this. There's a funny thing that happens. Only the elite are allowed to have an opinion. If you're a worker, if you're employed, if you're on a contract, you do not have a right to an opinion. How liberal is that only the bosses get a say? I think it's disgraceful.
It's socialism. It's socialism. And
well, but we were told, though, this is in the name of... They always use all these words that you can't argue against, like inclusivity, diversity and tolerance. And Where is the tolerance for a devout Christian whose livelihood has been decimated, who has been humiliated, and...
The simple reality is he's not calling for any harm to be done to anyone, and that is the dividing line on freedom of speech. All he's doing is reciting what's in the Bible, but I can never get past this logic, and that is that we're saying that the people being offended is more important than his right to his faith. But how can you be offended if you don't believe in hell? Because you may as well have said they're going to Disneyland.
But that doesn't, it's not about...
They're going down to
Disneyland
Eager Cheese Factory for the weekend.
Those two things exist. It might as well said you're going to Narnia.
If you think hell exists,
well,
and you presumably are a devout Christian or devout Muslim who reads the Bible, and the Quran, those things tell you that you are going to hell. So as our drinkers, as our fornicators, as our, I mean, you know, it's actually, I'm speaking of characters with colourful characters who've...
colourful identities,
I thought I would segue into just saying a few words on the sad passing of Bob Hawke, a colourful character indeed. I'm hopefully going to offer you a slightly different perspective. The 80s were a fantastic decade, and they gave rise to some of the best post-war political figures, including Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, Mikhail Gorbachev, and certainly their equal in the charisma stakes, our own Bob Hawke. As an Australian living in London during the 80s, selling Fosters to the Poms, to have as our Prime Minister a sports-mad, womanising larrikin who was in the Guinness Book of Records for swilling the amber nectar seemed a perfect fit for the times. Australians were fearless, politically incorrect, brash, loud and super confident. We changed cricket. We won the America's Cup. Down Under topped the charts. Mad Max, Gallipoli, Crocodile Dundee, all our directors dominated box offices worldwide. It was a great time to be an Aussie and to be an Aussie abroad. And the world looked at our earthy, self-confident PM with a mixture of astonishment and envy. But while blue-collar Aussies topped up their schooners and took the day off to celebrate the America's Cup, behind the scenes, Bob Hawke transformed our economy and working practices, those of modern Australia. Here was a Labor leader prepared to do business with the big end of town, rather than demonise them, in order to make sure all Australians benefited from a booming economy and a strong work ethic, and to reward and incentivise the small business person and the tradie as much as the big union boss. Today, Tony Abbott is being pilloried. Nothing new there, but for saying Hawke had a Labor heart but a Liberal head. And Tony Abbott is right, of course. The contrast between Bob Hawke and Bill Shorten is the contrast between sculling a yard of beer in 11 seconds and nursing a Cascade Light for the entire night. It's the difference between AC/DC and Red Foo. Compare the pair. Bob Hawke united Australians. Bill Shorten deliberately divides Australians by race, age, class, gender. Bob Hawke owned up to his human failings, and he never set himself up as being superior to any other Aussie. Bill Shorten lectures others about their religious beliefs and his own superior morality. Bob Hawke ushered in superannuation to encourage Australians to put money aside for their retirement. Bill Shorten plans to steal it. Bob Hawke freed up our economy, stripping away regulations. Bill Shorten intends to strangle us in higher taxes, crippling energy bills and stifling socialist dogma. Bob Hawke explained to the Australian people how the economy works and why he needed to make changes. Bill Shorten refuses to answer economic questions and calls people who ask them dumb. Bob Hawke took practical, measurable and affordable steps to care for our environment. Bill Shorten panders to the most extreme excesses of the climate change cult, knowing full well nothing he does or you do will make a jot of difference to the planet's temperature. Bob Hawke opened up our economy to the world. Bill Shorten's mob want to open up our borders to the world. And finally, Bob Hawke chose Paul Keating to be his treasurer. Bill Shorten chose, I rest my case. And Bob Hawke never shied away from an awkward question.
Your opponent, Mr Fraser, told us yesterday that we'd been biased in our reporting of this campaign.
Shame on you.
How much have you been helped by the honeymoon that you have enjoyed during this campaign? How much have you been helped by the press being soft on you?
Oh, well, I tell you what, it's a long honeymoon. I've been around in public life since the early 60s. If it's a honeymoon, it's about time we consummated it.
That's the leader. We'll be back in a tick.
And welcome back. You're watching a special Outsiders Election Eve special edition with Rita Panahi, Rowan Dean, and of course, me, James Morrow. Now, you may have heard the other day that Carrie Ann Kennelly, the broadcaster, got in trouble on Twitter for saying that if Bill Shorten wins tomorrow night, it would end life as we know it. But what's the old saying? Change the government and you change the country? That's pretty much what Bill Shorten has been saying, and indeed promised at his Bankstown speech yesterday. While claiming that the Liberals are the party of division, he set out in his address a vision of a society divided. Banks against customers, bosses against workers, bigots against gays, retirees picking the pockets of millennials. You get the idea. And to hear him tell it, the only way to fix this is to elect a Labour government that can top up wages, shut down speech, and cast out the demons from public life who stand in the way of the road to the sunlit uplands by asking pesky questions about the cost of fixing climate change or just generally being, productive citizens. Anyway, it was the opposite, of course, from Scott Morrison, who also gave a speech that day, making the case that things in Australia are actually pretty good. And the last thing we need is a Labour government coming in to upend everything and interfere in our daily lives. Watching the two speeches back-to-back was a bit like the Dickens novel of the French Revolution, A Tale of Two Cities. Or in this case, it was A Tale of Two Speeches. And, if you really wanted to play with the theme, you might even say that Bill Shorten was not just channeling Gough Whitlam there, but even some of the architects of the French Revolution, like, say, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, suggesting that there was a general will for revolution, that he embodies it, and woe to anyone who stands in their way. Now, thankfully, we're not living in revolutionary France, and the biggest controversies over blades these days involve Gillette ads and not guillotines. But you get the point. Anyway, you could even go further and suggest that for his part, Scott Morrison evoked the Revolution's great literary enemy, Edmund Burke, who would write elegantly about the little platoons on which society is built. But enough of that literary and philosophical guff. By the way, that's guff as in nonsense, not guff as in Gough Whitlam. Anyway, the point of all this is that for all the cynicism about politics out there in Australian life, this is actually a crucial election. It is one that will likely define the next decade of life in Australia. And so the choice is incumbent on you, the viewer, the voter, and all of us to cast that vote wisely. This is what I'm saying, that this is a crucial election. Whoever wins tomorrow, even if they're only got one more term or one term in government, will set the course for this country for a decade. And I think we cannot afford to get it wrong.
Everyone who has a IQ above room temperature is saying this is the most critical election we have had in perhaps decades. So it is. It's important. A lot can happen in one single term. And it's going to be fascinating to see what happens. I don't share your faith that the coalition's going to be returned.
Well, this is what we're about to change now, Rita, because we're going to advise people how to vote. We're going to give our tips from the three outsiders, how we intend to vote and why. Sorry, guys.
What?
That's rules of entry onto the set. But it's really important. I've had a lot of people saying, how are you going to vote? How do you vote? Because there's two things that are really confusing. The first is the whole Senate thing and above the line and below the line and all the things that happen there. And then, obviously, the simple question of Liberal or Labor in the lower house. So the thing that I've been saying repeatedly is it's absolutely critical that you put Labor and the Greens last or not at all in the case of the Senate. In terms of the lower house, whoever your local member is, number one to the Liberals. Doesn't matter who else it is, whoever your local member is, doesn't matter if you like them or not, number one on the lower house. That's Liberals, and then you go through the list. I put 1 for the Liberals first, then 6 for Greens, 5 for Labor, and then whatever else in between. That's the lower house. The upper house is a whole different ballgame. Now, whatever state you're in, there are different things. Now, I would say, and I said this at the last election, Every individual should be going out and finding the character of the people who are standing for Senate. It may be that they're the Liberal, like the case of Jim Molan. It may be like Jennifer Game in South Australia, the One Nation candidate. It may be like here in New South Wales, Sophie York, who I put #1 in the New South Wales Senate list. There are good Conservative people out there, but you have to find them. You then have to list them 1 to 12 under the line, starting with your very favourite Conservative candidate, working through. It might be a mixture of One Nation, Australian Conservatives, Liberals, whatever, but do not put any Labor or Greens anywhere on that lower 12.
And the ballots are massive, particularly in the upper house. They can be overwhelming. You've got, everyone from the Pirate Party to the Secular Party. I quite like the Secular Party, to be honest. The bulk of us will vote above the line, let's be honest. Very few will vote below the line, but I would encourage those who are in New South Wales. If I was living in New South Wales, Jim Molan would be getting my #1 vote below the line, and then I'd be numbering the other 11 spots. Because that is really making a statement and making sure someone who is highly accomplished is in the Senate and a value to the country.
And also in New South Wales, it's important to note that you do not, even though you have that whole tablecloth of 84, however many Senate candidates, you only have to number 12 below the line in the Senate. So that is the key thing. Do not be intimidated if you want to go down that road and pick out candidates whose character you agree with.
And don't get intimidated at the polling booth, because I keep hearing that these activists who are manning them are becoming more and more aggro, are getting more and more in your face.
Take all the things
be
from people.
polite, be nice,
back on the way,
but
recycling.
do what you want to do. Do not get bullied into taking somebody's card if you don't want to.
Correct. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be back with more Outsiders in a tick.
Liven up your lunch with deliciously lighter Tip Top sandwich thins. They're super soft and light for the perfect balance of bread and filling. And each one is only 99 calories. So whether you fill it, top it, or toast it, enjoy a softer, lighter lunch with Tip Top sandwich thins.
Magic in your eyes, and there's nothing to hide behind.
For making sense of a changing world. For knowing where you stand on the big issues. For seeing through the spin. For following the story all the way through. For understanding what's next. For the edge you need. The Australian, for the informed Australian.
Managing your health cover shouldn't interrupt your life. That's why, with the NIB app, you can manage your policy on the go, check your remaining limits, and simply snap to make a claim. Not bad. Yes. And if you need to, you can call the team awarded Australia's best contact centre. That's how it should be. That's NIB.
That, my friend, is a Penrite HPR5 5W40. And you owe me $10.
Graham's Lebanese stuffed tomatoes. It's the Middle East in a cup. This dish dates back. My great-grandmother taught it to my grandmother. It's something now that my kids love. If Graham was still around, I think she'd be super proud that her recipe still lives on.
Get the luxury look for less with 30% off your second light or fan from Beacon's inspiring new winter collection. These on-trend designs instantly update any home on any budget. 30% off your second light or fan now.
Have you ever wondered where your fruit and veg comes from? Well, at Coles, we believe Australia produces some of the very best fruit and veg from anywhere in the world. That's why Coles has an Aussie-first sourcing policy. All our bananas, apples, strawberries, tomatoes, carrots, and many more are all 100% Aussie 100% of the time. In fact, nearly all our fruit and veg is Aussie grown from Aussie farms first. Aussie fruit and veg. Good things are happening at Coles.
Han Ultra Crisp, an all-new full-strength, full-flavour beer with no preservatives, 99% sugar-free, lower carb and gluten-free. Han Ultra Crisp. It's ultra good inside.
When I book at Hilton.com, I get to select my room from the floor plan, free Wi-Fi, and the price match guarantee.
So with Hilton, there is no catch.
Yeah, the only catch is I'm never leaving. No, I'm serious. I live here now. Book at Hilton.com and get the Hilton price match guarantee.
Hi, honey. I've got the pork roast. I'll be home soon.
Riverview Farms pork roast. Perfectly cooked for your family and ready to go, just like Nana made it every time.
As Australia decides, we're following every move the leaders make.
How are you, mate?
As the battle intensifies,
This is a ripper.
it's going down to the wire.
It's gloves off time.
Sky News, Australia's election channel.
So that's the big question. Will Australia turn into Venezuela? Will you, the voters, turn Australia into Venezuela during the next 24 hours? We will let you know on Sunday morning on Outsiders. That's where you want to be at 9 o'clock to hear Rita and James saying, how, Rowan, you got it right again.
You are going to be, I fear, in the fetal position. Inconsolable. I don't know what I'm going to do to get you through Sunday morning. You don't want to miss it. I hope you're happy.
I will be riding high because the Australian people will not let us down. The Australian people are not going to go for these charlatans. They're not going to have their pockets raided by this mob. You guys will be sitting there going, how did you know?
Why
well,
didn't I put a
we're going to
bet
be
on?
sitting there going, there, Rowan. It's okay.
I'll be crying because Coalition was
Well,
$7. That was $7 this week in a two-horse race.
There we go. So you're not going to win. Well, we've got a great show. We've got John Ruddock, we've got Amanda Stoker, and lots happening on Sunday morning at 9 o'clock. We will see you there. Lots to do in the meantime. But now, don't go away because it's Paul Murray with a fantastic panel. There's Chris Kenny, there's Sharry Marks, and there's Corey Bernardi. There's all sorts of people. I will be watching.